Matthew 5. We've been talking about kingdom and kind of honing in on our relationships. And so we started talking about, Jesus' the passages on anger. And really what that boiled down to is, how we talk to one another, the way we sometimes misrepresent and malign people. And then we talked a little bit about what Jesus spoke of adultery and lust, but then we kind of boiled that down to the way we treat each other. The way people of the opposite sex treat each other, the way we treat our wives, our significant others, all those sort of things in the kingdom. Today I want to talk about, Jesus says it this way in verse 33 of chapter 5 of Matthew. He says that, again, you've heard it was said of those of old, you shall not swear falsely, but shall perform to the Lord what you have sworn. But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is the throne of God, or by earth, for it is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not take an oath by your head, for you cannot make one hair white or black. Let what you say, here's verse 37 is it. This is the key. Let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more comes from evil. Let what you say be yes or no, but anything more comes from evil. Now let's talk about this for a few minutes today. So in the first three passages here on relationships, he's gone straight to the Ten Commandments, and he's quoted a commandment. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not covet. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Here it's kind of a summary of the oath passages that he's coming from the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, this is a good place to start. We've done that with every one of these. What did the Bible say? What did the Old Testament say? What did the Scriptures say in the Old Testament? Well, God often guaranteed the fulfillment of His promises in the Old Testament. There's a real good one in Genesis chapter 9, verse 9. You'll be familiar with this passage. He said, he's talking to Noah, by the way. He says, I establish my covenant with you that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the sign of the covenant. See, there's the word, covenant, that I made between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I've set my bow in the cloud, that's a rainbow, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and you. I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every other living creature. God said to Noah, this is the sign of the covenant, verse 17, that I have established between me and you all flesh on the earth. So I like that passage to use because in the Abrahamic covenant, the other covenants, he doesn't hone in, but he says covenant over and over and over. So there's a covenant between God and man in the Old Testament. Now, if you're thinking about covenants, there's two kinds. Sometimes the Old Testament is called the Old Covenant, and the New Testament is called the New Covenant. Not a far reach from what we call it, a testament, but a covenant's a little bit stronger word. So if you think back in the Old Testament, what's the difference between the covenants with God? Well, the Old Covenant, what was the covenant? God would be their God, and the people would be His people, right? But what else? They would have to keep His law, right? If God was going to be their God. So the Old Covenant was a two-way street, right? Now the New Covenant, God said, I make a covenant with you, and He gave us His Son, right? What can we do in this covenant with God? What part do we have in that? We don't have one. Jesus did it all, right? Now there is obviously, because we're learning about living in the kingdom, a way of life that's expected. But in the Old Covenant, They had to sacrifice animals. They had to do all sorts of things, right? None of that goes on with us. We are just to faithfully walk. Okay, so I just wanted to make that distinction. So, in the Old Testament, though, a person was permitted to swear by the name of God. Okay? And what they were doing was, they were saying, in the name of Jehovah, I say this in the name of Jehovah, and that was really affirming their promise, right? I do this in the name of Jehovah. And so, an oath or a vow helped a person remain faithful to their commitment, because if I'm going to do something in the name of Jehovah, claim to, then I'm going to think about that if I'm thinking about breaking my word, right? And so the law demanded that a person be true to a sworn oath. Let me give you a couple of examples. They're in Scripture that y'all read all the time. One is in Leviticus, and I'm joking. I know you don't read Leviticus very often, but in Leviticus it says, "You shall not swear by my name falsely, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord." There's the Jehovah, Yahweh God. So you shall not swear in my name falsely. So if someone among God's people said, "I swear in the name of Jehovah," falsely, they were committing a great sin against God. And so in Numbers 32, chapter 30, verse 2, Moses writes, "If a man vows a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by pledge, he shall not break his word." Okay, so you see this in the Old Testament, right? I swear in the name of Jehovah. And then a person would go about living that out. Okay? And so, Deuteronomy 23:21 says, "If you make a vow to the Lord your God, you shall not delay fulfilling it. For the Lord your God will surely require it of you, and you will be guilty of sin." That says it real well. Okay, so we see what was going on among God's people in the Old Testament times. And so, this was so common that there's a book that the Jews call the Mishnah, which is a book of practices for them, and there is a whole section in the book on different kinds of oaths. Oaths in regard to marriage, oaths in regard to business, oaths in regards to contracts, all right? All telling you how to do this oath in the name of God. And so it was an elaborate system, is what I'm trying to say, of swearing in the name of God in the Old Testament. And all this was done so you would surely follow through on it. Okay? So you can see that. And those of you who've read the Old Testament know how good the Israelites were at fulfilling their word, right, to God? No. Not very good, right? Not very good at all. And so if they didn't fulfill their word to God, how do you think they did to each other? I don't think they did very good. And so, but what had happened by the time of Jesus' day, and so what we can see happening in this passage in Matthew is, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, they were all about figuring out how to do what? Get around the law, right? So they had begun to teach that, well, if you don't swear by Jehovah, maybe swear by heaven, if there's a chance you may not follow through with it. Or swear by Jerusalem. Then maybe you're not quite as culpable for the sin as swearing by God. And so Jesus is, what does he say in Matthew chapter 5? He says, "But I say to you, do not take an oath at all, either by heaven or the throne of God, or by the earth, or by his footstool, or by Jerusalem." So you understand that a little bit better? We've done this. It's really more childish and not think about it, but I can remember as a kid saying, "No, I swear on my mother's grave." Right? Did any of you ever say that, or am I just too old? Yeah. Yeah. "I swear on my mother's grave." My mother was alive, so I guess I didn't. There really wasn't a lot of, but there were all these sayings we used to have. "I double swear," "I double pinky swear," all these different things. And that was all in an attempt to convince our friends that we were serious, right? Or that the story was true. So we've done it, maybe on a more juvenile level. This is the same thing going on. And so, so if a person wasn't serious in Jesus' time about what he was swearing to, then he would pick a less sacred thing. And so, in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus jumps on this again. But here's the thing: they thought that since they weren't using the literal name of God, like I swear by Jehovah or I swear by God, that it wasn't considered binding. And we already know the condition of the hearts of the people in Jesus' time. By the time he got there, they weren't true to God, and so this increased tendency by God's people to find loopholes in an oath led to really the devaluation of any kind of promise, any kind of a oath. And so this is where Jesus comes in. He says, I don't want to hear you give an oath. I don't want to see you swearing or giving any kind of oath. There's a writer, Josephus, and if any of you ever get the time, it's well worth the read. Josephus was captured and taken back to Rome by the Romans after the fall of the temple. And so he actually lived during the time of Jesus. He's really the only author we have, historical author, of the time of Jesus till about 30 years after Jesus' death, of the Jews. He wrote 2 books. One's called War of the Jews, and one's called History of the Jews. And it's about the size of a Bible. And I tell you what, if you really want to get an even deeper understanding contextually of the Old Testament, it's a great read. It's a great read. It's almost like a commentary on the life of people in that time. But he said this. I say all that to say this. He wrote of the Essenes. Do y'all know who the Essenes is? John the Baptist was an Essene. These were the writers of the Dead Sea Scrolls. These were the group of Jews who moved out into the Judean desert and lived in the caves. That's where we found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And John the Baptist, remember, locust eater, camel hair wearer, living out in the desert. And what they did, they were mostly men. I will say this, though there were a few women, mostly men who went out in the desert, and they were kind of like monks. They just went out. They said, we've got to get away from these people who aren't following God. We're going to get out and get into a place where we can follow God. And they had their own cities, really, out in the desert. So this is what Josephus said of them when he wrote about them. He said, any word of theirs has more force than an oath. Swearing they avoid, regarding it worse than perjury. For they say that one who is not believed without an appeal to God stands condemned already. Now hear that. This is before Jesus said this. This is a group of people who said, we're not going to swear, we're not going to give oaths. And they believed that one who had to swear was worse than lying, if you had to swear by God. So what Josephus is saying is what came out of their mouths, you could absolutely believe. Now think about that. Group of God's people who it is said of them that everything that comes out of their mouth, you could absolutely believe. Now really think about that. A group of people who, I guess today you might could say they're Christians, and whatever comes out of their mouths, you can absolutely believe. And so then this is where Jesus, what he's doing, he's going right to the heart, just as I've said in the other instances. He's going right to the heart of the law's intent regarding oaths when he says that his disciples are what? Not to swear at all. If you're a Jesus follower, you're not to swear at all. And did you grow up with this in your grandmother's home or something and around your mother? If you said a bad word and it says, the Bible says we're not to curse. Do you remember? Nobody had that? I mean, if you said a bad word, that's what my grandmother always said. Gregory, the Bible says we're not to curse. And this was where she was coming from, swearing. I mean, when I grew up, swearing meant bad, using cuss words and stuff. And so if you use a bad word, the Bible says not to curse. Well, that's not what Jesus is talking about. I'm not condoning cursing, using bad words, but that's not what's going on here. It's when you use words to guarantee the truth of what you say. That's what Jesus is condemning here. And so why? I mean, don't oaths seem like a good thing? You still go to court. I don't know how they still do this. They've gotten rid of the Bible. But they still say, when you go to court and you testify, you know, do you agree to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? And everybody says yes. Right? That's how we know that everything said in a courtroom is the truth, right? Not. But this is where Jesus is coming from, though, isn't he? Where else do we do it? Like when we get married? We give an oath. Just all kinds of things. There's all kinds of paper we sign we don't read anymore, but we're giving an oath. But anyway, why is Jesus doing this? Why is he saying this about his disciples? Because he knows the human heart. Right? He knows the human heart. You know, I once upon a time, I spent some time in courtrooms because when I was with Tom Thumb, we would get sued for slip and falls and things like that. And we would have film. We would have videotape of people faking a fall. And then you go to the deposition or the courtroom, and they would sit there and lie. And you'd watch them. And then they'd show the film proving they lied, and then they'd lose. I mean, who are you going to believe? Me or the picture? And y'all may not know this. This is another thing I learned on Law and Order. But this is confirmed. Eyewitness testimony is some of the worst testimony the police find. You know why? Because people tend to tell you what they wanted to see or what they, you know. And I can remember a case in which I testified in, I won't get into the details, but I was a character witness for the defendant. And I didn't lie, but I wanted to make that person look better than they were. Because I wanted it to go better for them than it was going to go for them. As a pastor, you get asked to do some of these things sometimes. It's kind of like, and it's always somebody in your churches, somebody they know's kids have gotten into trouble or something. It's kind of like marrying someone you don't know. You don't want to do it. So anyway, this is what Jesus knew. He knew our hearts. He knew what was really in our hearts. Because people sometimes people will make an oath in order to conceal something that's true, right? Right? How many police officers do you think pull somebody over on Friday or Saturday night and they say, "Have you had anything to drink?" "No, I swear to God, nothing." And the odor is just vaping from their car, right? Right? I've got a bunch of these stories. I won't go into them where, even some with your kids, "Did you break that?" "No, I swear to God, I didn't break that." So it's making sense, right? And some of these are juvenile, but what Jesus is saying, it starts out juvenile, but it gets into our adult life, and we want to swear. We want to say, "No, I swear I didn't do it," or that this is true, when we know in our heart it's not true, or that we are guilty. And this is what Jesus is talking about. So he says, here, I'm going to contrast it for you. Jesus says, my disciples should be people of integrity. And they should have character. And that there should be a truthfulness in the heart of my people. And so that everything that my followers say is completely dependable. Right? That it can be believed. It's believable is a better word. So A person of integrity, just kind of think about this. A person of integrity is one who in their daily conversation, the words we speak every day, they're truthful. In their relationships with people, they're dependable and genuine and reliable, so that their words can be believed without an oath. Okay? In other words, what Jesus says is, I just want a simple yes or no. My people in my kingdom, I want them to deal with each other, and I want their yes to be yes and their no to be no. And it should be enough for a trustworthy person. Paul, there's some use of this, and Paul in Corinthians talks about this. Paul, in Corinthians chapter 2, verse 1:15, he says, because I was sure of this, I wanted to come to you first, so you might have a second experience of grace. I wanted to visit you on my way to Macedonia and come back to you from Macedonia and have you send me on my way to Judea. While I was vacillating when I wanted to do this, so yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, I made plans according to the flesh. Okay, you see Paul kind of saying, I was going back and forth. Yes, no. But I made plans according to the flesh, ready to say yes, yes, and no, no, at the same time. So Paul's even demonstrating, Paul's a leader, an apostle, and he gets himself into a situation where he's wanting to give a false yes. You know, I know I can't, but I'm going to say yes. So you see that how this happens in relationships, just between people? We say yes because we don't want to say no. But what Jesus is saying, my followers are such a dependable, such a reliable, such a people of integrity that they say yes or they say no. And you can count on that yes or that no. And so James, the brother of Jesus, he said this in one of his letters. He said, but above all, my brothers, do not swear. Okay, and again, he's talking about promising. Either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath. Let your yes be your yes and your no be your no. Okay? Why? He says, so you don't fall under condemnation. What do you think of a person who always says yes to everything and never follows through? They lose their word with you, right? They're just not dependable. So, but what Jesus' point is, and this is where, you know, and I've used this before. I don't know where I got this in my life, other than God's Word. But I have to think back. I was a father so young. I was 19, and so it must have just been God, a God thing. Though I'd probably heard this my whole life. But Kim will verify this, and my children will verify. And people who know me, I will not make a promise. I won't. No one in here can say I've ever made them a promise, because I won't do it. And the reason I won't do it is I may not be able to do it. Even if I promise it. I never promised my kids anything. And when they were little, they would beg me, Daddy, please promise me. And I won't do it. I said, I'll do my best. That's what I said. They want something for Christmas, or they want to go somewhere. All of those things that kids ask. So I always advise parents, never, ever promise your children anything. Because when you begin to break your promises to your children, you lose your credibility with them. And what you get is what I got. Well, if you won't promise, then that means no. Well, then you just have to teach them, and you have to show them that you're going to do the best that you can. And so that is kind of an example of how it is with children, but I do that with people. I do that with everyone. I never promise that I'm going to do something. I'll say I'll do my best to do it. But Jesus' point here is so simple, and this is really one of the simplest of these lessons in relationships. The anger other part, that we dealt with in the lust and the coveting, that's hard. That really is hard. It's people because of sin. But this is really a simple thing. This is a mindset kind of thing. And most of us in the room are on the let's say this, we're on the second half of our life. Some of us are still on the first half. That's a good way to say it, right? We're on the second half of our life. So maybe we've had this, maybe just beginning this now is, you think, well, it's too late now, I'm just going to go on the way I've been doing it. But it's always a good thing. It's always a good thing to get in this mindset. And it's so simple. Just be trustworthy. Just let your word be trustworthy. In the world we live in today, no one trusts the media at all. And they've earned it. The media has earned it. You never know. I'll give you an example. And this goes back to, this just happened this week. And it really surprised me. So, Daniel came and told me Tuesday morning, I think, may have been Monday, that one of the people who testified in the Amber Geiger case had been executed. And that was out on the street. When in fact, a drug deal had gone bad, and he had shot a guy and they shot him and killed him. So, that's what I'm talking about. It's that first news. It's that news that's put out there to sensationalize. And so I went to my computer and pulled up the information on it, and I went back in Daniel's office and said, look at this. And so that's the media. But we have leaders, people who are leaders, supposed to be leading us, representing us in government, in the world, all over. And we know they're lying. We know it. Because we know the truth. I would even say we have Christian representatives in different things that we're not sure whether we can trust what they say. So this is the point Jesus is getting to. In my kingdom, my people, when you speak, everyone should know you're a follower of Jesus, you can be dependent on. Are we going to mess up? Yeah, just like we do on all the others. But I think it's that person that then corrects themselves and says, wait, I think I misled you in this. You see where I'm going with this? Again, it's like everything else. We're going to fail at some point. But I think the example of this is just going out day by day in speaking a simple yes or no. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. And then let it fall. I know none of us still say, I swear on my mother's grave or whatever. Or I swear to God. I mean, if I hear that, it always kind of goes to my heart anyway. I'm like, whoa, careful. And I don't know. I think in a wedding, I think in a courtroom, I think it's okay to ask someone if what they're going to state is the truth in the eyes of God. I think that's kind of a different situation than what's going on here. Jesus is talking about with our family, with our friends, with our coworkers, and all that we do. Just let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I think out of all of these in the Sermon on the Mount, this one is maybe the most relevant to our society today. I long for a community where people's yes is yes and their no is no, and I can count on that. So I'm going to stop there, and next time we're going to move on into this and actually we go into retaliation, which once we get into that may have a really big effect on where we are. And then we go to love your enemies, which I've preached at least 10 times since I've been here out of this passage. But this is one of my favorite passages And then we'll move into kingdom living and getting back into some of those healing purposes that the kingdom of the Sermon on the Mount leads us to. So let me pray. Father, thank you so much for this day and this message. Father, we were few today, but I think we looked at the words of Jesus, and I pray that this is something that we can grab hold of and digest and take into our lives and live it out. I pray this in your precious name. Amen. We'll do our offering real quick, and then Amber will lead us. And I think Anna's gone out with the baby. But Vanessa's coming.